and welcome to the advanced class for creating preludes and postludes from the hymn book. My name is Mark Campbell, and I'll be sharing some ideas with you that I've gleaned over the years. One of the first things to remember about being a musician in the church is the idea of ministering. The idea that we've been called, whether that's to play for a sacrament meeting or a state conference or regional conference, that our purpose is to try and create an atmosphere that invites the Spirit and that also helps people to worship. In the spirit of that idea, it's important to remember that what we do is not a performance per se, although we do put a lot of preparation into what we do. As far as the idea of what a prelude is, you might say kind of tongue-in-cheek that it's sort of the spirit of Elias, the coming beforehand and preparing the way. Not really, but you are coming a certain number of minutes early. You're helping to prepare by creating an atmosphere where the Spirit can be present, and you're helping people recognize what's about to happen. For sacrament meeting, that would be an ordinance. You're helping them prepare for the sacrament itself. If it's a conference, a regional conference, state conference, you're preparing them to hear from their leaders or hear from people who've been invited to speak. As far as the idea of a postlude, you essentially have two objectives. Number one is to help preserve the spirit of the meeting that you were just in, and number two is to get them out of there. You're essentially trying to help encourage people to stand up and to reverently leave. As far as considerations for preparing prelude, you can think more in terms of softer registrations, slower tempos. The goal is to try and help people think about the text of the hymn. However embellished the music itself might be. In terms of postlude, usually you kind of think more in terms of energetic, rousing, more upbeat tempos, though that's not always the case. I remember being told a while ago that it could be a good idea to have two different preludes ready, just in case, say, the meeting ends on a more of a softer, subdued kind of a spirit, and then you have some big, loud rendition of something prepared. It might be more in the taste or the spirit of the meeting to have something softer prepared. Another idea about postludes is that you might consider doing a setting of the closing hymn as your postlude. It seems as kind of a natural segue. If everyone just finished singing a hymn and then you launch into a rendition of it, it kind of has a natural flow. Another consideration for postlude is that if you do end with something a little bit bigger and more energetic, that it might be a good idea to follow immediately after with something more subdued, a little bit quieter, to bring back down the energy level of the room that you're in. For the first prelude, I thought I'd select something that points out an important idea. That is that the children's songbook is a good source for prelude material, especially when we want to engage the children in the congregation. So the song Reverently Quietly is one of the first reverent songs that I remember ever hearing in primary. As far as ideas for creating preludes from the music, I thought we'd talk about the idea of the ninth. The ninth is one step higher than an octave. So the octave would be from C to C. And one step higher than that would be a D. Now that's also a repeat of the second. But when you add it to a C major chord, you can also put it in the middle of the chord. Adds this kind of sweetness to it. The ninth actually works together with the major seventh. If you're thinking in terms of C major, the major seventh would be a B natural. By itself, a C to a B natural is a dissonance. But when it's incorporated in a major chord, you get a very sweet colored harmony called the major seven chord. A major seven chord is interesting because if you add the ninth, what you essentially have is a G major chord stacked on top of a C major chord. By itself, in root position, it doesn't sound like much. But as far as creating very rich harmonies, I find that the major seven chord tied together with the ninth can add a lot of warmth and color to your arrangements. next prelude, I thought I'd choose something that would help illustrate the idea of a motive, motivic material. It's nice to create hymn arrangements, whether preludes, postludes, when you use material that's coming from the hymn itself. A motive is a rhythmic or melodic or harmonic idea that is very recognizable, and it can be a good creative way to wrap a hymn inside of material that's coming from inside the actual composition itself. In I'm a Child of God, the chorus has this repeating motive. As far as different options for how to use motives, one device is to create introductions and interludes. So you create sort of this motivic rhythmic gesture that introduces your arrangement and might be interspersed between phrases of the melody, or might be in between verses of the arrangement. For this next hymn setting, I've chosen Jesus, the Very Thought of Thee. And rather than to try and treat it motivically, I've decided to create an introduction based on the actual material from the melody and the structure of the hymn. So it starts off from the first few notes of the beginning of the melody and then jumps to the last line, all to create an introduction before the beginning of the first verse. Another very useful technique for creating settings is called horn fifths. Horn fifths come from the instrument the horn, and comes from back in the day before there were keyed brass instruments. The natural harmonics that you get when you blow on a bugle or a horn follow the harmonic series, which, if any of you are familiar with that, starts out with the fundamental. Let's say we start at low C. The next would be an octave above, then a fifth, another octave to C, then the third, and then the fifth, and the octave again. That continues upward, but those particular notes create the character of the horn fifth. The typical way of creating horn fifths is to have two voices moving through the pitches. In the key of C major, the notes that I'm choosing are C, D, E, and G. In the scale of C major, that would be Do, Re, Mi, and Sol. That would be the first, second, third, and the fifth of the scale. And I have the two voices moving. Let's say my left hand starts on E, and my right hand starts on C. And both of them move in parallel motion, but through only those notes. Let me do that again so you can see it. On the organ, horn fifths don't always have to be played by reed stops, though that is very effective, say when you have a trumpet moving in horn fifths. In the sacrament hymn, "'Tis sweet to sing the matchless love," that brings up another point, another good idea. When you're creating preludes, especially for sacrament meeting, when you draw upon sacrament hymns, that's very effective in helping people prepare to take the sacrament. In my arrangement of "'Tis Sweet to Sing," I've decided to use horn fifths. This is in the key of E flat major, but instead of using a horn, to use a 4-foot flute, more in keeping with the spirit of Prelude. It's good to mention that a well-written reharmonization for a last verse on a large hymn can also make a great postlude. For this arrangement of For the Strength of the Hills, I've decided to incorporate horn fifths once again, this time actually using the reed stop on the organ. The opening line of For the Strength of the Hills moves in arpeggio on an E flat major chord. And if you remember, that's very much in keeping with the horn fifths, the idea. All it needs is a second voice down below. I've also decided to utilize the scalar pattern in the second phrase, which is so difficult for us organists to get with our feet, but I decided to incorporate that in the introduction along with the last line. This next hymn is strongly associated with the Tabernacle Choir and their weekly broadcasts. God Be With You Till We Meet Again brings up two very important points. Number one is that postludes don't have to be loud. It's a very subdued song. It'd be hard to play this one with gusto. And the other one is that when you're creating a reharmonization or an arrangement and you want to get very colorful with your harmonies, it's good to work with a hymn that has very basic harmonic structure. God Be With You Till We Meet Again is in the key of C major. Throughout the hymn, it visits only 3 major chords: C major, F major, and G major. Those are the 1, 4, and 5 chords respectively. And that is rather like a blank slate for those who want to embellish with harmonies and non-harmonic tones. So this hymn makes a very good opportunity for those who want to be very creative with their harmonies. Another great compositional technique for arranging and composing is the idea of imitation, where one voice imitates another. And if you take imitation to its furthest extent, you get what's called a canon. That's where a melody chases itself. And we've all heard melodies from our earliest days. Row, row, row your boat, for example. Etc. The use of canon can be very effective when you're creating an arrangement. I've chosen We Thank Thee, O God, for a Prophet. Some things to watch out for if you're going to try and do a canon is to know that not all melodies can chase themselves successfully. You might have to alter some notes on the second voice that's following to make it sound harmonically clear. But just know that the effect is noticed, though. People will hear the fact that a melody is following itself. One of my favorite compositional techniques that harkens back to many centuries ago is the use of modality. Musicians over the course of their studies eventually will encounter what people call the church modes. The basic idea is that if you have nothing but white keys, for instance, and you start on C and you go up, you've got a C major scale. We call it major, the major mode. In other instances, people would call it the Ionian mode. Has to do with where whole steps and half steps fall. We won't go into that. But if we start on D and go from D to D and play no black keys, that's the Dorian mode. From E to E would be the Phrygian mode. F to F is Lydian. G to G is the Mixolydian. A to A, what we call natural minor, was also called the Aeolian mode. And the seventh scale degree, going from B to B, is the Locrian mode. I can take each of those modes and I can create a triad using the first, third, and fifth of the scale, and it goes up in a pattern of major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, and then a diminished chord. And that seems very elementary to our ears, but if you're hearkening back to many centuries ago, before they had our concept of tonality, the modes were actually very colorful. If you were playing in Dorian, for instance, it's slightly off from what we would consider minor. It has, for instance, the raised sixth scale degree. So each of the modes have their own color and flavor. For this next hymn arrangement, I've chosen As Zion's Youth in Latter Days, and I've decided to mix things up modally. So typically we think in terms of major or minor. In this instance, I decided to take the melody and throw in some Mixolydian. Mixolydian, if you remember what I just said, is from G to G, where that seventh scale degree, we would usually sharp it to make it sound major, but when that seventh scale degree is lowered, that's the character of the Mixolydian. If you take that and turn it harmonically, then what you get is that F major going to G major. If you remember me earlier talking about how a hymn that's very simple harmonically makes for some opportunity to create color, to add in extra sounds and harmonies. In this instance, I decided to talk about non-harmonic tones. The hymn Sweet Hour of Prayer is also harmonically very basic. It's in C major, and it very often visits C major, F major, and G major, the 1, 4, and 5, so there's a lot of opportunity to embellish. Non-harmonic tones include things such as suspensions, so when I hit that, that's a D going to a C down in the alto voice, where the D suspended. It resolved after it should have. Other non-harmonic tones, such as neighboring tones, where it's moving to a neighbor and back again from something that's not part of the original harmony. So I decided for my arrangement of Sweet Hour of Prayer to fill it full of a bunch of non-harmonic tones. It can be exciting to step into the realms of arranger and composer. I know not all of us necessarily feel like that's who we are, but as we work on our hymns, we realize after practicing them so many times over and over again, ideas come to mind sometimes. Add a little extra note here, change the registration there. I would encourage you that whatever it is that you come up with in your arrangements and whatever you do to your hymns, that you write it down. Sometimes we think that we've played it so many times that we're ready to play it in front of people, but it's always best when the notes are right in front of our eyes. There's another reason too, is because then you can share it with other people. One other thought I'd say is that as you're working on hymns, and if you really want to delve into the realms of arranging and creating preludes and postludes, reharmonizations, whatever it might be, start with hymns that have special meaning to you. You'll find that hymns that are dear to your heart tend to resonate more. They have an authenticity as you create around them. You'll tend to feel a special spirit as you work with them. But I hope you've learned a lot from this. I'm passing on things that I've learned from others, so best wishes with all of your hymn playing, your hymn arranging, and good luck.